year host of the Cycle Power Summit 2019, and I'm here in this session with Destiny Herndon-De La Rosa. Destiny is a writer and activist and is founder and president of New Wave Feminists, a group that works to promote the consistent life ethic, which is a belief that all human beings should be free from violence for the duration of their lifetimes, beginning in the womb. Destiny, welcome. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for including me in this. It's a very cool concept.
So I want to introduce this a little bit because this is going to, and most of our attendees are going to know from my introduction there, that this is going to be a little bit of a tangent from what we've been talking about in the Cycle Power Summit. We're all about menstrual cycles and the power that that gives women to, to understand their bodies. And you are working in the pro-life world, and our attendees may not all identify with being pro-life. So one of the things that I really admire about your work is, as we were talking about before that we started recording, is that you are all about the conversation. Let's just talk about this stuff. We don't all have to agree, and we don't even all have to agree on everything. But let's just have a conversation. And we have some of those particular challenges in the world of fertility awareness and restorative reproductive health, as well as we're working against some of the longer held beliefs. The other major, I think, thing where we can identify together is this concept of new feminism. Can you just talk about what you mean by a new feminism?
Yeah, I think, for us, it's really focusing on how have women in general settled for the status quo without even realizing the way that so many of these things have kind of infiltrated the feminist movement, especially, and been packaged as liberation and empowerment, when really a lot of just our own natural health and abilities and, this power that we have has over time been shifted to, this is a liability, this is a weakness for you as a woman. And so we're really wanting to go back and embrace that. And as you said, we're all about the dialogue. We really try to put forth this idea that we want to discuss stuff in order to learn from one another. So it's not a matter of, listening to respond or to react, but listening to learn so that we can truly understand, okay, these are the concerns of people who disagree with us, and is there common ground in this space? And there's so much common ground. Most of my friends are pro-choice. Most of the people that I surround myself with are pro-choice. It really benefits me as an activist to not be in an echo chamber and understand what it is that women are really trying to look for and fight for, and especially when it comes to our reproductive health and the things that we're putting in our bodies, and just questioning that status quo and saying, could we be doing better? Is there information that we don't have yet?
That is a powerful concept about the status quo and believing things, especially when you don't know what other options may be there or other questions that may be asked. How do you think we got there? Like you were saying before, how frustrating it is that how come nobody told me this? And I think, especially that, in the world of fertility awareness, we get, it is frequently posited that like using a natural method of birth control is too hard. Women are not going to be able to remember to check when they go to the bathroom or to remember to chart at night, or it's too restrictive. Like we actually have to use our mind and will with sex, instead of just doing whatever. Where's that history of that line of thinking?
Yeah, I think, at one point with the development of the pill, we were in a different place, and women were trying to work outside of the home, and they wanted that power and that control. And so the medical community just, came down like this ray of sunshine and was like, here, let us empower you with chemical contraceptives. And I'm not opposed to chemical contraception. I just think that for a very long time, I was completely kept in the dark about it and did not know, we went from a generation that worked to gain this empowerment to a generation like myself. I was born in 1983, where we didn't even realize that there was another way of doing things. And so it kind of became this, you don't know what you don't know type of scenario. And one of the things that really opened my eyes to it, obviously being a pro-life feminist and being involved in that community, I'm surrounded by a lot of Catholics. And I was raised in a Protestant household where my mother always said, like, yeah, you know, Catholics have all those babies because of the rhythm method. And that was like it. That's kind of what we all thought. And I didn't realize, like, first of all, no, they have a lot of babies because they want to take over the world. And I get that now. And that most of the time, like, they literally plan to have 12 babies. But coming from a WASPy Protestant background where it's like, you don't go beyond, you know, your 2.5 children in your family. And so I was on a red-eye flight with a friend of mine, and she was Catholic, she was charting, and I didn't even know this world existed. And so I was 31 at the time, I'm 35 now, and had been active in feminism in this field for like over a decade, well over a decade. And I remember her looking at me and being like, oh, what time is it? And when I told her what time it is, she goes, oh, crud, I gotta go check my mucus, I'll be right back. And I was like, what did you
On the airplane?
On the airplane. And I was like, you have to do what? Excuse me? Like, I don't, if I can't vape in the bathroom, I'm pretty sure you can't do that. And so she goes and does that and comes back and then pulls out her phone and starts putting her temperature and all of her information in there. And I'm like, okay, explain, you've just blown my mind. Like, explain to me what you're doing. And she starts walking me through the process of what she's trying to do. At the time she was trying to get pregnant and had been struggling with infertility, and realizing how different our journeys were. I got pregnant at 16 years old with my son. And as soon as I had him and went in for my first checkup, like 6 weeks, my doctor immediately put me on the pill. And it's just what you do. Like, I certainly don't need another teen pregnancy. And so this seemed like the common sense, responsible thing to do. Then I remember going back 6 months later, and he switched me to the patch, which was this little like sticker thing that you put on that releases the hormones, right? And then 6 months after that, I go back for another checkup. And of course, this whole time, I've never once complained about what he had me on prior to this, but then he puts me on the ring, and he's like, this one's even easier. You just, you know, stick it up there and you don't even have to think about it till you change it out a month. And I thought the whole time he was doing this for my benefit, because maybe he thought I was some like flighty teenager who wasn't going to remember to do stuff, even though I was. And, you know, finally, after the third form of birth control I was on in an 18-month period, I realized, like, oh, every time I'm in his office, there's these pharmaceutical reps that are sashaying in and out, you know, with all of this stuff that they're you know, pitching to him, and I'm getting the free samples. Mm-hmm. But in reality, I'm being the guinea pig for all of these different types of hormonal birth control. And so after that, I took a few years off without taking any hormonal birth control. And that was very risky. Like I you know, just stuck to prophylactics at that point. And thankfully I did not get pregnant again. But, you know, then I got married, started my family, and I was a stay-at-home mom for a few years. I'd be at home and we would, you know, have just the TV on in the background as noise. And I saw all of these commercials for these class action lawsuits for the very birth control that my doctor had me on. And the fact that I was not aware of that, because like, who actually takes the little pamphlet out and reads all the side effects and
right.
You know,
2 pages long
at all. Yeah. And I mean, and I, of course, having the mentality, oh, it's never going to happen to me. Teen pregnancy is never going to happen to me. And blood clots and hemorrhaging are never going to happen to me. Like, it's never going to happen to you. And at the same time, I didn't know that there was necessarily a better solution. So again, that was my shock at 31, suddenly realizing, like, wait, there's this whole world of just natural holistic care that I was completely unaware of, because it had been deemed a religious thing rather than a scientific thing. And at the same time, I was living in a neighborhood with all these like crunchy, you know, doula midwife type moms who were giving birth in hot tubs in their living room and stuff. And the funny thing is, they were so careful about everything they put in their body except for hormonal birth control, this thing that they're on for, you know, 30, 31 days a month, and they don't even question it.
Yeah. And gosh, I have like 5 things that jumped out at me of what you said, but you know, when we were talking about when the pill first came out and how it really was an answer, because the church, and I'm Catholic, but there wasn't a good other option at that time. So you had these big families that, you know, who were overwhelmed with cost and with just, you know, God, managing 8 kids. And we didn't have a better solution at that time. And so it was the solution. And I mean, I think that's a really important concept to recognize, that we can't just throw out that whole thing because it was a solution, and definitely has its downfalls.
Well, I think as a feminist, one of the things that always kind of sticks out to me is the fact that this has always been at the expense of women's bodies. So when we talk about patriarchal structures in society where men held most of the power and the money and the status, and we've evened that out, thank goodness, in so many ways, but we now hold the burden of our fertility, and our health is what ends up suffering. So we're not seeing men on hormonal birth control. It's something that women are expected to take. And back to the roots of it, if you really look into the history of even the pill, how it was basically used on, marginalized women, that it was in Puerto Rico, women who were in nursing school were told that they had to be a part of this trial in order to get their nursing certifications. And the fact that many of them were sterilized, some, it drastically impacted their emotions and committed suicide. I mean, like, there is kind of a very racist history when it comes to birth control. And the problem is we moved so far away from that. Nobody remembers the roots of it. And then it just became, oh, Western medicine's the solution for everything. And so I agree with you as far as like having options and making sure women have them. But in order to be truly empowered and have options, we have to have the information. We have to understand the full picture, and we have to know that there are other options out there. And that's something that, I completely experienced just waking up one day and realizing like, oh my gosh, I know nothing. And furthermore, the fact that it is viewed as like this, the medical institution has your best interest in heart. But when we see, 14, 15-year-old, 16-year-old girls going to their OB and saying, I'm having really bad menstrual cramps, or I'm having acne or bad headaches, or any of these other things, like the fact that the solution is immediately get on the pill. Like, this is a healthcare Band-Aid that doesn't actually address the root cause. And so now in my 30s, having so many friends struggling with infertility because for years they had this Band-Aid that basically took a perfectly functioning system. And then when there was a problem with it, rather than going in and addressing it and curing the problem, whether it's fibroids or endometriosis or any of these other things, it was just, here, we're going to ignore it because, in 15 years from now, you'll probably have a different OB and that won't be my problem anymore. And realizing that it's just lazy medicine that keeps us from actually treating the whole woman and finding out, it's not just a matter of preventing pregnancy, it's used a lot of time to mask other symptoms.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It is used to just treat those symptoms. And one of our partners in the Summit, Facts, is their mission to go and educate in the medical schools because, and we're not about bashing doctors because this is something that they really just don't even know. They're not taught in medical school. And there's going to be a great presentation in the Summit where we can actually see the data that these words are just not even used. Fertility awareness and natural options, they're just really not aware. And so, yeah, that's the whole point of the Summit here, is to bring that awareness that, and mainly for, like you're talking about, for the health stuff, when we can put the family planning aside and just focus on the health aspects of charting and being able to dig into those underlying issues, because then we have the information. But our bodies, like you're talking about on hormonal contraceptives, our bodies can't communicate with us anymore because it's just been masked. The system has been taken over. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. We want to ask you, Destiny, so when we're moving the conversations, if we can go back to maybe a little bit of philosophy and what I mentioned that I admire most about you, of having conversations both around abortion and life issues as well as natural family planning. And you mentioned this too, that it used to be, or maybe is traditionally a religious thing, but there's this movement, this new wave, feminism, as your name of your group says, into this being more of a human right thing. And how can we both continually move these conversations forward among people, as conversations and not as this fight among political or religious groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the solution we've found is having real conversations with real people, using stories, using, anecdotes. And this is what this woman went through. This is what I've personally experienced. Like, have you experienced anything like this? Like, that's the best way to cut through all of the religious dogma and the the politics that have infiltrated this conversation, because there are so many women who, I think, especially, I'm agnostic, so especially kind of in the secular realm, where when you start, quoting a Bible verse or something, that doesn't apply to me. But at the end of the day, science does apply to me, biology does apply to me. And when I speak to a lot of pro-life groups on college campuses, I find that they're using a lot of religious rhetoric. And the one thing I always challenge them with is, if you believe God created the whole universe, then didn't he create the atoms and the cells and science and biology to begin with? And so you don't have to have, a Bible verse attached to something. Truth is truth is truth. And so in my mind, using science to talk to people is kind of this universal language. And if you believe in a higher power, I do believe in a higher power, then I feel like that is the most pure form of this deity, is the fact that there are no human fingerprints on it. You are literally just talking about a creator and creation and what has been created, and honoring our bodies and understanding everything about ourselves and truly celebrating who women are. Because I think that we've seen so many things shift in the last wave of feminism that have made the male body normative in the workspace, in education, everywhere. And so it all comes down to, this is a man's world and this is how women are going to fit into it, rather than saying, no, let's accommodate women, let's accommodate their fertility and their health, and let's acknowledge that, rather than saying you have to conform to the system that we already have set up. Like, we want to change the whole system.
Right. We are women. We have babies. We have cycles. We lactate. I was one of those who gave birth to my 2 kids in a pool in the living room. So.
I tried it once out of my 4. I tried it one time, and it was an exciting hippie adventure. And definitely, actually, my favorite birth. He ended up coming out footling breech, which was crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
And as soon as he was delivered, everything was fine. The whole fire department rushed in, and I was very unmedicated, unlike my other births, and I was very naked. And I remember just being like, please stop looking at my butter. But yeah, no, obviously that was, and so it's kind of funny because people talk all the time about being pro or anti home birth, and I'm kind of in the middle. I did have a scary thing happen, but at the same time, thankfully, it worked out beautifully, and it was such an empowering experience to feel my body and know what was actually happening, because I hadn't had that in the past, and I healed quicker. My baby was healthy and happy, and just, oh my gosh, that oxytocin rush that you get after a natural birth is like heaven.
Yeah, that home birth conversation is a whole other conversation. No worries, but it is relevant because we are different. As you say, we are different from men, and let's find the ways to dig into that and to really understand it and not be hiding from it or trying to make it something that it's not. So it's
yeah, there's so many ways that I think we've stifled our womanhood. And if we didn't do that, if we went in, we just shared an article last week in Forbes about a woman who was 8 months pregnant interviewing for a new job. And like, that's unheard of. And she acknowledged in this article that it's like, she knew that this was such a long shot and so ridiculous, but she had the talent and the background and the skills. And so she walked in and sat for that interview, and they accommodated her. They let her have her, maternity leave after the fact, and hired her postpartum. And I mean, there were so many things where it's like, could you imagine us bucking the system like that, where that wasn't even a thought? Like, there was no stigma attached. It was, you want me, I'm an asset. And the fact that I do have children I'm providing for and a family that I'm taking care of, like, that actually makes me a more loyal employee than, otherwise. And so we're seeing a lot of systems that people talk a lot on the political side, at least, about, paid maternity leave. And we're talking about paid parental leave. Like, let's really even the playing field out so that women are not seen as a liability, and our fertility is not seen as something that makes us less desirable hires, but it actually is a strength for us. And I think once we can change our perspective about that, the fact that our bodies are amazing, I remember back during the last election, all of the rhetoric of like, oh, a woman couldn't be president because she's going to be on her period and she's going to go crazy and start a war. And I'm like, you know what's so insane to me is like that week out of every month is when I am the most in tune and passionate and creative. And we've gotten this bad rap that we should be sent out some red tent somewhere, but like the world has been missing out by not embracing us when we're fully in tune with our bodies. And we see that
just through the cycle. There's different ways where we can be most powerful. I mean, it's really incredible.
It is, and it is a fully engaged like power that we end up having. And so the fact that the medical community has moved to this place of selling women on the idea of never having a period, like you can go a full year with only 1 or 2 periods because of this, you know, new long-acting birth control. I think that does a disservice to us. I think that's that status quo that we're talking about, because there really is so much power in just understanding the way our bodies work and embracing it and calling on society and our culture to embrace it as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point about the women who went in and that, because I think that's going to be vital in seeing these changes. Is we just have to start going out there and doing it, because then other women see that and they change behavior, and we have to continue changing it that way instead of just standing up on a platform and talking and preaching about our platform or our beliefs or what we're trying to change, but encouraging and empowering women to believe that they can walk in, you know, for that interview, or they can walk in. I love your little card about, you know, talking to women who find themselves pregnant in a difficult situation and just telling them that they are badass and that they can do this, because that's different from a lot of the rhetoric that they hear from other people.
Well, and I think from my own personal experience, I wrote that card to my 16-year-old self. You know, that was me saying all the words that I wanted to hear. And thankfully, I did have a supportive family. So I had people who were sad for me, but they were like, we're going to be here with you. But it was still, you know, that kind of image that you see on a lot of pro-life pamphlets. It's the sad girl holding the pregnancy test. It's always raining in her world and she's crying and looking out this rainy window. And I just had enough of that, because I do recognize the power, even when it's completely unplanned. This can change your entire life. This can make you a stronger and more motivated and active person, and it can help you advocate for others in that same position. But I do agree. I think it has to kind of start from those upper echelons, especially in the workplace. You know, women who can go in for an interview 8 months pregnant, like that's a glorious thing, but there's a lot of privilege wrapped up in that, because a lot of hourly workers wouldn't be able to have that same experience. And so when we start realizing that if we remove the stigma at a higher level, that will trickle down into our society, and it will show people how badass women are, and that this is something to be embraced and not viewed as a weakness.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, in the other side, and the hormonal contraceptive fertility awareness side, when you're in the doctor's office and this authority is telling you that this is the best option, like you're talking about, with yourself, and it's really intimidating to counteract that. You say, no, I'm going to use this fertility awareness method, and you're trying to explain that to somebody who believes, you know, and I hate to bash doctors, but sometimes, you know, believes that they know what the answer is because that's what they've been taught. And taking that step out to go against the status quo is really hard. And so I think it does, in some ways, start with the words that we use when we're talking to other women, you know, and when we're talking to ourselves, that even before we take that step, that we, you know, we are women and we are powerful and we can take that step.
And I think that so much when we're talking to medical professionals, because I agree, they have our best interest at heart, and this is what they have learned, and they've probably been given the same kind of information I was as a child, where it's like the rhythm, 12 kids, like that's what that equals. And so they don't know what they don't know. And being able to go in and say, you know, I care about my full body health, and these are the things I'm concerned about. And, you know, chemical contraceptives it's a class 1 carcinogen. And so putting it into my body every day for 15 years or however long I'm going to be on it concerns me. And you hear a lot in the feminist world where they're like, you know, oh, they'll pay for Viagra, but not birth control on insurance plans. And the thing that I was always that raging feminist too about that issue. I'm like, you don't need those stupid blue pills. Like, forget that. And then I was talking to a woman and she said, well, if you think about it, the little blue pills are fixing something that's broken, whereas the little pink pills are taking something that's functioning the way it's supposed to and breaking it. And for me, that was really eye-opening, that if we realize that what so much of this hormonal birth control does, it's supposed to suppress a natural process. And the more that we can talk to doctors about this holistic view of our own health and all the other ways we implement it in our lives, so we want to implement it in our reproductive system as well, I think that that does give them the information to be more lenient when it comes to other women. With one of my kids, I actually had a Catholic OB in Dallas, and it was so funny because he didn't do any type of birth control. He was completely fertility awareness. And so when I walked into his office, it was like walking into a Bennigan's. Like all of the signs and plaques on the wall were about like drunk Irishmen and stuff, because he didn't have these birth control ads up everywhere. And I was like, oh, you had to go to Hobby Lobby and actually like purchase the wall for the walls. Exactly. But he was fabulous. And I found that there was so much in that interaction during that pregnancy where he really honored my body and understood it and wanted to figure out what was wrong at certain times and just treated me as a whole person. And I wasn't just being kind of like rushed in and out, like how to like, here's your prescription, buy, that type of mentality. And I think more people are waking up to that. Even the medical field is waking up to it, that are we going to treat women, you know, quickly, or are we going to treat them well? And it becomes a quality versus quantity type thing. So I think we have to change the stigma around NFP and fertility awareness so that they actually understand that this is something that women can use to plan pregnancies and to space pregnancies and to prevent pregnancies. And that is, it's highly scientific. It's highly important. You know, the Natural Cycles app is FDA approved so that you can actually track your stuff on your phone. Like, we're in such an awesome age where this information has become readily available.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It really is. Destiny, thank you so much for sharing your story. When I invited you, I had no idea that you were actually this passionate about this stuff. So it's perfect. And I really enjoyed having you here.
Thank you so much.
We're asking all of our guests what their #1 cycle power tip is.
Oh man, cycle power tip. Okay, so I feel very hippie having a cycle power tip. I think really it, for me, is getting out of my comfort zone and exploring other, you know, alternatives that are not just in the medical community. That is when I felt the most empowered 4 years ago, to realize that there is this whole other world out there and walk into it without any prejudices or biases and say, okay, this might be kind of hippie, but maybe there's some truth to it, because it is kind of what we've been using for like millennia now and has worked for a lot of people. And through that, understanding my cycle and the power that it brings me, and, you know, even charting, like that was something I had never done before. And so having it on my phone and checking my moods and all of this stuff, I now have 2 daughters. And so they're at the age, one of them her cycle's already started. And that's been the best thing, to be able to pass that on to my children. So definitely get outside of your comfort zone, learn stuff that you wouldn't necessarily know, because you can incorporate it into a medical practice. It's absolutely something that can be incorporated that way. And then it's going to offer your patients so many more options when you can talk to them about their whole body. And then obviously, like our dinner table is our best platform too. So talking to our families and our daughters about this, and our sons, I think they should be just as aware of how this works.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Destiny.
Thank you.